We'll start off in the Gospel of John today, and this is at the end of Jesus' ministry, and he's with his disciples, and he's just freaked them out by washing their feet, which was a dirty, gross thing to do, but highly symbolic, and it was so symbolic and so powerful that Peter, he says, no, Jesus, don't wash my feet. And then Jesus says, if I don't wash your feet, you'll have no part, in what I'm doing and my movement. And Peter, is always kind of missing it. He's like, oh, okay, then wash my whole body. And it doesn't say this in the Bible, but I always imagine Jesus being like, chill, Peter, it's a metaphor, come on. And so it's kind of this intense moment and everything. And Jesus says to the disciples, he says, dear children, I will be with you only a little longer. And then he says, so now, because I only be with you a little longer, so now I give you a new commandment. And we talk about this a lot here at Faith. This is an important moment, perhaps the moment in John's gospel story. A new commandment, not number 614, but the commandment, the one thing. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. Powerful, important moment, like the moment. And look how Peter responds. Lord, where are you going? He just gave them the one commandment that is to define us. Here at Faith, our motto is to learn to love like Jesus loved. Like, it's that simple. That's what we're about. And Jesus just reveals this. But Peter, he's like, where are you going? And Jesus goes, look, I already told you, you can't go with me now, but you'll follow later. And Peter says, but why? Why can't I come, Lord? And what Peter's really saying beneath the surface is simply this, like, I don't feel secure. You're telling me you're leaving, and when you said you're leaving, that so made me feel insecure. It scared me so much that I couldn't hear anything else that you had to say. It was the new commandment, right? Like the big moment. But I think that this just says something about how we're wired. He's feeling insecure. He's worried. And that's all he can think about. And Jesus, he understands. And so he kind of pivots and he says, look, don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. When everything is ready, I will come and get you so that you will always be with me where I am. In other words, Peter, look, you are secure. It's going to be okay. Our connection to one another, it will remain. It won't be lost just because I have to go away for a little while. You're secure. We are in the third week of a sermon series titled Created for Connection. And this sermon series is based off of a book called Created for Connection by Dr. Sue Johnson. And in Created for Connection, Dr. Sue Johnson, she explores attachment theory, which is what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. And at the basic level of attachment theory, I believe is a question that we're all asking, no matter whether your age is, what your gender is, what your life experience. But attachment theory is assuming that every single one of us asks this basic question over and over again during our lifetime, which is, am I secure? Because you see, you formed an attachment in childhood with your caregiver. And back when you were a baby, that attachment, that connection with your caregiver, whether it was your mom or your dad or your grandparent, whoever it was, that attachment was absolutely critical because you're a baby and you can't fend for yourself. And what attachment theory teaches us is if you get consistently good and loving care from that caregiver, you'll develop a view of the world that is secure. You'll believe that other people can be trusted. You'll believe that you're good enough for relationships and you can have secure relationships. And that's where we all want to be. But if you didn't get consistent care, if you got inconsistent care or somebody failed to attend to your emotional needs, or worse yet, if you were abused, you would develop some other form of attachment. And these attachments formed in childhood, they are carried into adulthood. And so if you got inconsistent care as a baby, attachment theory says that you will develop an anxious attachment, and in your adult relationships, you'll be plagued with anxiety. Or if you got inconsiderate care, where that parent, maybe they attended to your basic needs, but they never attended to your emotional needs. And so then as a child, you learned to turn inward when you had an emotional need because you couldn't trust your caregiver to give it. And then in adulthood, you tend to be the kind of person that when things get difficult, you shut down. You wall up. And you don't let your special someone in. And the good news is that attachments formed in adulthood, they can actually heal the wounds of childhood. So if you're lucky enough to find somebody that can truly love you in a secure way, and if you're willing to do the work to explore your childhood wounds and begin to weave new narratives for yourself, you can begin to heal those childhood wounds. And that's good news, little lowercase g. But in the last 2 weeks, we also explored the idea from the Christian perspective, the perspective of theology, that there's another source of love. That's the love of the Creator. And Dr. Sue Johnson, the scientist Sue Johnson, I quoted her last week, said that people who are able to develop the secure attachment with a loving God, which is the premise, the foundation of Christianity, they're able to get the stability and security that we all need. And so last week we looked at how Jesus claimed the secure attachment from the love of the Father. And as we looked at that and how he just heard the good news at his baptism and he claimed it and began to base his life on it, and he invites us to do the same, we also looked at the fact that when you begin to claim the good news, there's this other persona that shows up, and Jesus, or the Bible refers to him as the Satan, which is a title that sometimes can be translated as the accuser. And you might not believe in Satan, you might not believe in Jesus, you're questioning the whole thing, and that's okay. You're in the right place to have doubts and questions. We welcome that here. But you do know about this, right? Because we all have that voice. You maybe were convinced it was just you, but it's all of us. That voice that seeks to undermine our confidence in our fundamental goodness and the goodness of God. And it gets in your ear. You don't have to go looking for it. And Jesus, he teaches us how to deal with that. The first thing you do is you identify that this is the accuser. And it takes Jesus 3 temptations before he's able to name the accuser as such, because the accuser, that little small voice, it shows up and it's hard to identify at first. It's crafty. But once you identify it, then Jesus tells us what to do. Y'all, who was here last week? Y'all remember what to do? Let's say it together. Get. If you weren't here last week, you just go back and watch last week's message online. You'll get that joke. You should show up to church, It's a good time. So he tells us, you identify the accuser and you say, get behind me, Satan. Get out of here. Okay? Because at the fundamental level of the Christian theology is that God loves you unconditionally, right where you are, just as you are. As we've learned through our study of the New Covenant in the previous series, is a unilateral, unconditional, unlimited love for you. That's the good news. It will change you. And from the perspective of attachment theory, it is that secure connection that we all need to be able to have healthy relationships, a healthy view of life. Now, I've learned a bunch of cool stuff by reading this book, and I want to share one with you today at the outset. Attachment theory, it says that conflicts between couples, whether it's you and your wife or you and your husband or whatever the situation might be, but conflicts from attachment theory perspective are always at the heart level. They're asking the question, am I secure? But typically, we have conflicts or we argue at the head level. We're asking, who did what? Anybody know what I'm talking about? The conflict is here at am I secure, but we argue up here, and that generally doesn't go over so well. In fact, here's how I wish it went. This is just me. I wish anytime I had a conflict with my special loved one or anybody that was close to me, that I could just get out my whiteboard, and I'd be like, let me draw you a diagram, a little chart here, and then, we'll have an org chart to kind of show you how this, and then, point number 3, I'll do another chart. And then after I do my whole presentation, I imagine that it's just going to be like, she loves me now. Oh, Scott, I didn't know. Thank you for clarifying. You're so good with the whiteboard. I'm in love with you all over again. But generally, it looks more like this, little skulls. And you see, we think that conflict is about the content. But attachment theory is saying it's really about connection. Connection. And we tend to approach it up here. But attachment theory is saying you need to get down here to the fundamental question that we all have. Am I secure? So, today we're going to talk about demon dialogues. And before we can do that, we need to talk about a theology of evil. Jessica, where are you at? You see that? Yeah. See, skulls, flames, snakes, Jayhawks. Yep. If you went to the University of Missouri, you would understand. And in terms of this theology of evil, we're going to talk about evil's place, purpose, and practice. I could do a whole series on this topic, but, we're just going to go through it because you guys are above average intelligence, and I think that you can get this, all right? So John chapter 10, this is Jesus, and he's preaching. He says, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. I'm the pathway. And Jesus uses all these metaphors. So basically, listen to me. I can show you how to really live, how to navigate life. He says, all who came before me were thieves and robbers. And commentaries on John suggest that two of the people that Jesus might have had in mind are Theudas and Judas of Galilee. These are two individuals mentioned in the 5th chapter of the book of Acts who came along and said they were the Messiah. They were the leader that everybody was looking for. And they led a violent revolution against the Romans that ended up in the Romans crushing them. But these two are not the only people to do this. In fact, there's this long line of violent revolutionaries that have come up time and time again saying, follow me, I'm leading you to the way to life. And instead, Jesus says they were just thieves and robbers. And then Jesus, he changes the perspective just a little bit, subtly, and you can miss it. But he's talking about these thieves and robbers, and then he says, the thief. And what Jesus is suggesting is that even though these thieves and robbers who lead you astray, claim to be God's Messiah, claim to be the one you should follow. Jesus is like, I'm the one you want to follow. But other people have come before me, they claim to be the one to follow. They're distinct individuals, but there's something in common with them. They're thieves, but there's the thief. And he's suggesting that there's this power, this reality that manifests in these individuals. Jumping over to Ephesians in the writing of the Apostle Paul for a moment, Paul says, we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Paul's saying that you think the fight is against the person in front of you, but there's a reality behind that person. And Jesus is saying there's these thieves, but there's the thief. There's this grander reality that manifests in these individuals. And so the place in which evil takes place is the darkness. Darkness! That's right, Kaylin. Go watch the Chappelle show. You'll get it. Darkness! Meaning, kind of this hidden place, this hard to identify place. Remember, if you were here last week, Jesus, he does not identify the tempter as the accuser until the third temptation, until the third test. There's something crafty about the way Satan works. And you're like, I don't even believe in Satan. I understand. Just there's this crafty, this unpredictable nature about how things work. And look, I got to tell you, I think the Bible, it's not superstitious. It's sophisticated. And you're like, a little guy with a pitchfork and a red little suit, like, I don't believe in that. Good, that is a cartoon. But this idea that there's a reality that's behind the scenes, a deeper reality that manifests in it, that there's a spiritual level of life, this is something I think that is incredibly sophisticated. And in a sense, you actually believe this. You believe this if you can finish this sentence. A less talented team won because they had good team. Say it. Spirit. I mean, the other words were like synonyms. Everybody gets credit. Passing grade. You hear about this, right? It's good team spirit. Or you meet somebody, there's that somebody, they can come into a room and they bring kind of a negative spirit and it changes the dynamic of the whole thing. There's a spiritual level of life that manifests itself. The Bible is sophisticated, not superstitious. Going back to John, Jesus says, the thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. That he has no purpose other than to break things down. And as you explore this within the context of the Bible, you see it doesn't matter what direction it's broken down, the thief just wants to break things down. I'll give you an example in a minute, but the place is the darkness, and his purpose is destruction. We're going to have fun with evil here a little bit. Come on. Let me give you an example of how this plays out. And then what's cool about this story is it shows that the purpose of evil is destruction. And it plays out in the darkness. But then it points in the direction of the practice of evil. Jesus, he encounters this man that Mark tells us who is plagued with the demon. He's got an evil spirit within him. And we're told that day and night, this man, he wandered among the burial caves and in the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. He has no purpose. He's out in the darkness. He's out off in the distance in the caves and the hills, and he's cutting himself. And anytime they try to chain him, he breaks the chains, and he's hurting people, and he's hurting others. No purpose other than destruction. And Jesus shows up. And the man speaks to him, and he says, why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me. Let me ask you a question. Does Jesus engage in torture? Right. Jesus does not engage in torture. There's no scripture that describes Jesus torturing anyone or anything. Yet, this man, he's worried, the demon within him is worried that he might get tortured. This poor guy is possessed by a lie, a deception about God. I met somebody this week, and she was sharing with me that she had struggled with depression for a time. And she had come from a very fundamentalist, kind of narrow view of Christianity. And in that view, you weren't to look out at any other perspective outside of their view of Christianity. So it was a sin problem. Don't go see a therapist. Don't go read psychology. Don't do anything because God's going to get you. And she said that she had just hit a wall. And finally, she prayed one day. She was out for a walk and said, God, just release me and let me explore some other alternatives. And she got a therapist and got better. And she had believed this lie about God, that somehow God was going to restrict her. And this guy, he's been taught a lie. And it's destroying him. Going back to John, it's no surprise then when Jesus is explicitly describing the devil, here's what he says. He says, he was a murderer from the beginning. He has always hated the truth because there's no truth in him. When he lies, it is consistent with his character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. The practice of evil is always deception. It's the lie. Deception. So you got deception, its purpose is destruction, and it works behind the scenes. It's not as easy to identify as we like. With all that in mind about evil, it's time to move to the demon dialogues. And the demon dialogues, these actually come from Dr. Sue Johnson. That's her term for it. She's a scientist, but she's also a Christian, and so she puts a Christian theology around her findings in our scientific practice. And demon dialogue, simply put, are predictable patterns that destroy relationships. They're predictable patterns. She sees them over and over again as she's worked with various couples on their marriages and on their relationships. And their purpose, this is why they're demonic, and you might not like that term, that's okay, but you can identify these. You're gonna know these, okay? If you've been in a relationship for more than 5 minutes, you're gonna know these, okay? All right? And I'll only make you raise your hand on the first one, okay? But the predictable patterns, and they destroy relationships. Demon dialogue number 1 is called Find the Bad Guy. Anybody? Anybody ever play this one? Okay, come on, raise your hands, church. Yeah, we did. Yeah. It goes like this. It's your fault. No, it's your fault. It was on a Tuesday. No, it was on a Wednesday. You're fighting all up here about facts and dates and all this sort of thing, and you're just trying to figure out who the bad guy is. And we so predictably fall into this. And this is a pattern where we're both coming at each other, pointing the finger. And here's the reality around this, or the lie. The lie, when it comes to finding the bad guy, is the security is found in finding the bad guy. The lie that is beneath the surface that you need to identify, that you fall into, is in that moment you think that if you can prove that he's wrong and you're right, that somehow it's going to be all hearts and love and everything. But what you find, and you know this because you've been in this, that even if you can convince the other person that you're right and they're wrong, instead of the closeness that you desire, it's disconnection. It's a lie. Dr. Johnson, she says, the accuse pattern itself is the villain here, and the partners are the victim. The enemy is the pattern that we fall into. And the Satan, the accuser, just putting some theology on this, he doesn't care who the bad guy is. What he cares is he wants you both pointing at each other because he wants to divide you and destroy that connection that you have. Demon dialogue number 2, Dr. Johnson calls it the protest polka. She uses this like dancing metaphor, okay? Protest polka, it can have kind of 2 forms. One is an accuse and defend sort of thing, like you did, no, I didn't do, and like that sort of thing. But then it evolves into this even more severe state where it's like one person says, you don't care, and the other person says, well, I'm never right. And there's this one person is moving towards the other person. They're the pursuer, and the other person is the distancer. Generally, actually, it's the woman who's the pursuer, and the man's the distancer, just because of how our culture teaches us to deal with our emotions. I flipped it because we're inclusive here at Faith, I like to mess with things. And so it's like, you don't care, I'm never right, and so then the person moves away a little bit, and then the person falls, my heart is broken, like bringing the intensity up a little bit, and the person says, I just feel numb at this point, and so they move away a little bit, and then the person comes after them again. We are just roommates, not a married couple. And the person says, maybe I'm not made for marriage. It's getting pretty intense at this point. And behind all these conflicts, remember, this is the core idea of attachment theory. All of us are asking the question, am I secure? Am I secure? And the lie that of the protest polka is that the protest is a problem, not a plea for security. And what attachment theory is saying is that rather than conflict or control, the issue from an attachment perspective is the emotional distance. The issue at hand is that both people are feeling insecure in the relationship, and one person, just because of how they grew up or the dynamics of the relationship or whatever it might be, tends to be the pursuer, and the other person tends to be the distancer. And as the intensity goes up, instead of it being an attack and trying to destroy the relationship, what's really going on, if you can see beneath the surface, if you can get an objective view of it, is both person is making a protest saying, I don't feel secure. I don't feel secure. And it makes sense that, the person that's kind of on the receiving end of it is going to distance because, they're being attacked. But the person that's doing the attacking is also a protest saying, I don't feel secure. I need to be close to you, so I'm coming to you. And I'm doing anything to get a reaction from you. And it tends to play out in most couples that one person is the person that shuts down and moves away, and the other person moves towards. And it's this feedback loop, and it's so predictable. And you think, yeah, this is a problem. But if you can begin to see that that's actually a protest saying, I need connection, there's the change. If you don't, you tend to fall into the third and the scariest of all the demon dialogues, which is called freeze and flee. And you see what they're saying to each other? Nothing. Nothing. The lie of this demon dialogue is it's safest just to defend and deny. I'm just going to defend myself, and I'm going to deny there's a problem. I'm no longer going to extend myself in vulnerability, which is what is required to actually have a loving relationship. Instead, I'm just going to hole up. I'm going to focus on the kids. I'm going to focus on my career. I'm going to focus on my golf game, whatever it might be. But I'm just going to hole up, and I'm going to deny mostly to myself that there's a problem here. And when this happens, this is what happens. And before long, the relationship is over. Because the person that distanced in the protest polka, they just keep distancing. But the pursuer just gives up and stops pursuing. In dance terms, the music's playing, but nobody's dancing. Both on the sideline. New beginnings, Dr. Johnson says, because she's been with couples that have been here, where all hope is lost. But she says new beginnings, and we as Christians, we believe in new beginnings, don't we? We're a resurrection people. God can bring new life out of death. That is our basic core narrative. It's the reason we always have hope as a Christian people. But Dr. Johnson, who works with couples from a scientific point of view, even though she's a Christian, she has seen new beginnings. She says they start with knowing how we create the trap that we are caught in. It's a trap. And theologically speaking, the accuser, the thief who just wants to destroy your relationships, wants to trap you in these very, very predictable patterns. The thief, the Satan, the accuser says, it's her fault. It's his fault. You know, you thought you were thinking that, but it's so predictable because as Dr. Johnson has seen in her practices, and as you probably know after just talking to your friends, you're not the only person that feels this way. It's a pattern that we fall into. Find the bad guy. She doesn't care. You're never right. Protest polka. It's hopeless. It's hopeless. Freeze and flee. It's a predictable pattern. And when you're here, part of being here, this is what makes it so hard, you feel alone. You feel alone. You feel like nobody can understand. And that's exactly where the accuser wants you isolated and alone and hopeless. But Paul tells us, remember, we're not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, that there's this other reality at play. And the problem is the destructive pattern, not the person. It's the destructive pattern, not the person you're in relationship with. Unless they're like a sociopath, and then they're probably the problem. I was wondering if the sociopath joke would work. It was risky. You're probably not married to or in relationship with the sociopath. You're just in relationship with a run-of-the-mill sinner. I mean, you know, and guess what you are? Anybody want to tell them? You're a run-of-the-mill sinner too. Sinner's a good word. It's a good word. We need this word. It means you missed the mark. And if you don't think you missed the mark in your life, you're probably the sociopath, you know? Right? You're in relationship with somebody that misses the mark, somebody that has insecurities, who's somebody that's asking the question, am I secure? Just like you. And the problem is not them. I mean, yeah, they make mistakes, so do you. The real problem is this destructive, predictable pattern, these demon dialogues we get caught up in. And so the application is be opposed to the patterns of the accuser not each other. What would it look like if you could stand together against the pattern? What if it looked like if next time you get and find the bad guy, you were both able to say, oh, we're playing find the bad guy. And you're not the bad guy, and I'm not the bad guy. The bad guy is the pattern that we're falling into. And so let's stand together against that. Next time you're doing the protest polka dance, if you're able to say, look, oh, I see it, I'm fleeing, I'm distancing and you're chasing and it seems ugly on the surface, but beneath both of us, we both feel insecure and we're making pleas for connection. So let's turn to each other. Let's slow down the music, as Dr. Johnson says in our metaphor. Let's identify what's going on. The real concern is always the strength and security of the emotional bond you have with your partner. From an attachment theory perspective, I think from a Christian perspective that teaches us that we're created for connection. You're hardwired to need this connection with somebody else, with those core people in your life. You're hardwired to need it with God. And at its core, on the surface, it looks like all these other things. And we can go down the content tube, and I can get out my whiteboard and make all my points and naively thinking that somehow that's going to help, even though it never helps. The real issue is the emotional connection. Jesus says the truth will set you free. Truth will set you free. And you can find it in many places, but we found it in that little story from the Gospel of John. Jesus is telling us that fundamentally we are secure in God's love. As Christian people, the invitation, and if you're not a Christian, I'm glad you're here. Just to clarify, there's an invitation to have a secure connection with the creator of all things, who loves you because of who he is, not because of what you've done. And from that place of a secure connection, you can risk love with another run-of-the-mill sinner just like you and build something beautiful. But it starts with you're secure. And next week, we're going to explore how to secure the emotional bond with your partner. I was going to end the sermon series here with demon dialogues, just because I thought that'd be fun. But then, I got to the end of this message, and I was like, man, we got to talk about this. I want to know how to do this. Next week, we're going to talk about how to secure the emotional bond with your partner. But today, identify the pattern, not the person, as the problem. The next time you get into a conflict, next time you're feeling a distance, whatever it is, it's the pattern. And if you are in the freeze and flee and you've stopped talking and it feels hopeless, I know you feel alone, but you're not alone. There is a possibility of a new start. Dr. Johnson has seen it in her therapeutic practice, and we as Christian people proclaim it because of the resurrection. That God is a God who can bring new life out of death. Identify the pattern. It takes practice to do it. Identify the pattern, not the person as the problem. Let us pray.